From the dojo to the octagon, this is Budocast, your source for the latest in martial arts news, culture, and competition. From breaking fight results to evolving techniques, we cover it all. Let's get into it.
Yeah, let's dive in.
So if you were watching the combat sports world this past weekend, and we're talking specifically about March 28th and 29th, 2026, you witnessed an absolute masterclass in the sheer unpredictability of human combat.
Oh, without a doubt. It was honestly kind of wild.
Right. I mean, imagine dedicating 20 years of your life to mastering literally the most dangerous sport on earth. You're sacrificing your joints, your brain cells, your personal relationships, all to build this pristine, terrifying physical machine.
Yeah.
And then one day you wake up and you realize your biggest enemy isn't actually the person standing across from you in the cage. It's the clock.
It's the clock. It is the one undefeated opponent in combat sports.
Yeah.
Athletic mortality.
Yeah. Exactly. And usually, in traditional sports, that decline is a slow, somewhat polite process. Like a basketball player loses a half step on their vertical leap.
Right. Or a baseball pitcher loses a couple of miles per hour on their fastball.
Yeah. And they gracefully transition to the bench. Or maybe they just take a veteran minimum contract. But combat sports, it doesn't follow those polite, predictable rules at all.
No, it's visceral. The decline isn't a slow fade. It's sudden. And it is violently abrupt.
Violently abrupt. And this past weekend, looking across the landscape of mixed martial arts and boxing, we were handed this profound, real-time look into the absolute extremes of what it means to be a professional fighter negotiating with time.
We really were. I mean, you had events happening across the globe. You had a regional boxing ring set up in Prana, Brazil. And then at the same time, you had the massive glitzy stage of the Climate Pledge Arena over in Seattle for the UFC.
Two completely different worlds.
Entirely different. And when you look closely at the results, you realize you aren't just watching athletes, punch each other for a paycheck. You are watching real-time case studies in human endurance, in psychology, and honestly, the brutal consequences of aging.
Which perfectly brings us to the mission for this deep dive. Because we are pulling from some incredibly detailed event coverage and matchmaking analysis, courtesy of MMA Junkie and the New York Post.
Great sources.
Oh, absolutely the best. But we aren't just here to read off a list of who won and who lost. I mean, you can check a scoreboard on your phone for that. We want to examine the entire life cycle of a fighter.
Right.
Through three vastly different matchups from this weekend, we're going to explore an aging legend carving out an entirely new domain to outrun the clock. We'll look at a former champion violently reclaiming her identity right in the middle of her prime. And finally, a surging young contender dismantling an absolute icon to force a changing of the guard.
Because a fighter's career, it isn't a straight line. It's not a corporate ladder where you just put in the years and magically get the corner office.
Not at all.
It's a series of just violent peaks and valleys, desperate reinventions, and that constant looming battle against time. How a fighter negotiates with that ticking clock basically dictates their entire legacy. And the three fighters we are looking at today, they are all negotiating with time in completely different, fascinating ways.
So true. So let's start with the most extreme example of outrunning the clock. We are heading down to Prana, Brazil, for Saturday's Cris Cyborg 15 event.
Yeah, huge night.
Massive. The namesake of the event, the legendary Cris Cyborg, stepped into the boxing ring. Now, for context, Cyborg is 40 years old. She faced a boxer named Paulina Cardona.
And it was really a close fight.
Not even a little bit. Cyborg didn't just win some respectable veteran decision. She absolutely dominated. She defeated Cardona via a second-round technical knockout.
Like, Cardona couldn't even stand up.
Yeah, she was so battered, she physically couldn't answer the bell to come out for round 3. With that win, Cyborg captured the WIBA super welterweight belt, that's the 154-pound division, and pushed her professional boxing record to a perfect 6-0.
We really need to pause here and contextualize the sheer, unbelievable audacity of her resume at this point.
Please do.
We throw the word legend around so much in sports commentary, right? To the point where it almost loses its meaning. But Cyborg completely defies standard categorization.
Let's just break down the alphabet soup of her career.
That's a long list.
It really is. Right now, she is the reigning women's featherweight champion of the PFL, the Professional Fighters League, which is obviously one of the top MMA promotions in the world. But her trophy case, it is a literal museum of modern mixed martial arts history.
When you read the list out loud, it sounds completely made up.
She holds historic championship belts in the UFC, which is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, obviously the biggest stage in the sport. She has belts from Bellator, which was for a long time considered the primary rival to the UFC.
She has a belt from Strikeforce, which was this legendary promotion back in the late 2000s that featured some of the greatest fighters of all time. And on top of all that, she holds a belt from Invicta FC, which is a premier all-women's MMA organization.
Now, for anyone listening who maybe doesn't follow the granular everyday details of MMA promotions, what does holding titles in all of those specific, distinct organizations actually mean in practice?
Think of it like a football coach winning a Super Bowl in the NFL, right?
Okay.
Then immediately going to Canada and winning the Grey Cup in the CFL. Then going to an entirely different league like the old XFL and winning a championship there. And then, just for good measure, winning a world championship in rugby.
Wow. That really puts it in perspective.
Every single time Cyborg changed promotions, she had to deal with totally different unified rules, different cage sizes, different promotional pressures, and most importantly, completely different pools of elite challengers who had literally been studying her tape for years.
Just waiting to take her head off.
Exactly. But she conquered every single major MMA promotion that has existed in her era. And now, by adding a legitimate world boxing title from the Women's International Boxing Association to this list, she officially cements herself as a true dual sport champion.
It's honestly the equivalent of a legendary tenured university professor retiring from academia, only to immediately walk onto a movie set and win an Oscar in screenwriting.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. You are taking a lifetime of highly specific habits, muscle memories, and survival instincts, and just throwing them out the window to master a totally different medium. But wait, hold on. This is where I'm really struggling to understand her overall strategy.
Okay, what's the hang-up?
Cyborg openly admits her combat sports time is ending. She's 40. She's on the record claiming she has exactly one PFL fight left this year to officially close the door on her mixed martial arts career. She is actively planning her retirement party.
Yeah, the end is near.
But then, immediately after this boxing win over Cardona, she gets on the microphone and fires up social media to call out the undisputed, undefeated boxing champion of the world, Claressa Shields.
She did.
If you are 40 years old and you are explicitly winding down your career, why on earth are you calling out the absolute apex predator of a totally different sport? That seems incredibly reckless for a retirement tour, doesn't it?
Well, it seems reckless if you view it purely through the lens of, like, traditional career planning.
Yeah.
But to understand why she grabbed that mic and called out the most dangerous woman in boxing, we have to look deeply into the psychology of the athletic exit.
The psychology, yeah.
Elite athletes, and specifically combat sports athletes, struggle profoundly with what sports psychologists call the cliff of retirement.
Oh, the idea that one day you are a literal gladiator and the next day you are just a regular person buying groceries in sweatpants.
That's a huge part of it. When you have woken up every single day for 20 years with the singular defining purpose of physical combat, I mean, when your entire identity, your diet, your sleep schedule, and your social circle are built around peaking for a specific fight, the idea of just stopping is terrifying.
I can't even imagine that vacuum.
It creates a massive psychological void. So, having a definitive end date in MMA, knowing she only has one PFL fight left, means she can clearly see the cliff approaching. She needs a new Everest to climb just to justify waking up and pushing her body through the agony of a training camp.
And Claressa Shields is Everest.
Claressa Shields isn't just a boxer. She is a generational talent. That is the ultimate Everest.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, it's less about the logical step-by-step progression of building a boxing career and more about just needing an impossible task to feel alive.
Exactly.
It's like a high-powered CEO retiring, getting super bored after 3 weeks of playing golf, and deciding to fund a volatile startup just to feel the stress of a deadline again.
That is a perfect parallel. The stress is the fuel. But, beyond the psychological need for a mountain to climb, there is a deeply pragmatic, cutthroat business side to this call-out, too.
Oh, the money.
Oh, yeah. This matchup with Shields isn't some random name drop fueled by post-fight adrenaline. This is a seed that Cyborg and her management have been planting and aggressively watering for several years. It is the ultimate legacy cash-out.
Because fighting an unknown boxer in a regional promotion in Brazil for a WIBA belt doesn't exactly move the global financial needle.
It moves the needle for the hardcore fans, sure, but it doesn't secure generational wealth. Cyborg knows her worth. Cyborg versus Claressa Shields. That is a global mega event.
Massive crossover appeal.
Exactly. It's a massive pay-per-view draw. It guarantees a monumental payday. And frankly, it ensures that even if Cyborg loses, she goes out on her shield, daring to be great on the biggest possible stage against the absolute best in the world.
That's a really good point.
There is zero shame in a 40-year-old MMA fighter losing a boxing match to the greatest female boxer alive. It is a win-win scenario for both her legacy and her bank account.
Okay, that makes complete sense from a business and a psychological standpoint, but let's get into the actual mechanics of this transition, because the bridge from MMA striking to pure boxing is notoriously unstable.
Oh, very unstable.
We have seen historically great, genuinely terrifying MMA strikers step into a boxing ring and suddenly look incredibly amateurish. Like their footwork looks sloppy, their punches look weird and wide. How is Cris Cyborg, at 40 years old, with 2 decades of heavy MMA miles on her body, able to translate her skills so effectively that she is making professional boxers literally quit on the stool after just 6 minutes of fighting?
To understand the mechanics of this, we really have to look at the fundamental biomechanics of the two sports. In mixed martial arts, the threat of the takedown dictates absolutely everything about how you stand, how you move, and how you strike.
Because at any given second, your opponent might just decide they don't want to get punched in the face anymore, and they are going to literally dive at your legs to drag you to the floor.
Exactly. And because of that constant looming threat, an MMA fighter's stance has to be severely modified. Your base has to be slightly wider. Your weight is often distributed very differently, keeping your hips ready to drop into a sprawl.
Just to clarify for the listener, a sprawl is the defensive maneuver where you violently thrust your legs backward and drop your hips to the floor to stop an opponent from grabbing your legs, right?
Spot on. Because your brain is constantly dedicating a percentage of its processing power to anticipating and defending that takedown, you rarely get to commit 100% of your body weight into your punches. You are always holding a little bit of your balance in reserve.
I see. Because if you throw a massive looping overhand right and you put every ounce of your body weight into that front foot and your opponent ducks underneath it,
You're in trouble.
right. Suddenly your momentum is carrying you forward, your hips are completely exposed, and they are wrapped around your legs. You are spending the next 5 minutes getting your face smashed into the canvas.
And spending 5 minutes underneath an elite wrestler is an exhausting, absolutely terrifying experience. So MMA strikers learn to pull their punches just a fraction. They don't plant their feet as firmly. They don't rotate their hips as fully.
Wow, so they're always holding back.
Yes. But boxing removes that grappling threat entirely. You are operating in a vacuum of pure striking. For a fighter like Cris Cyborg, whose defining characteristic for 20 years has been her terrifying innate physical power, the rule set of boxing is incredibly liberating.
She doesn't have to worry about a double leg takedown.
She doesn't have to worry about a sprawl. She doesn't have to worry about kicks, knees, or elbows either. She can plant her feet solidly on the canvas. She can utilize her entire kinetic chain, and I'm talking starting from pushing off the floor, rotating her knees, violently twisting her hips, and snapping her shoulder to transfer 100% of her mass right into her fist.
Which is a horrifying thought.
It's a terrifying prospect for her opponents. The reason Paulina Cardona couldn't answer the bell wasn't just because Cyborg was throwing a lot of punches. It was the sheer concussive force of a fighter who has finally been given permission by the rule set to unleash her absolute maximum power without any grappling consequences.
That makes so much sense.
Cyborg's MMA striking translates so well to boxing because boxing simply allows her to be the most distilled, destructive version of herself.
That paints such a vivid picture. She essentially took the parking brake off her striking. She's been driving a sports car at 60 miles an hour for 20 years because there were speed bumps on the road, and boxing just gave her an empty highway to floor it.
Beautiful analogy.
Before we move on to our next fight and talk about a completely different kind of physical liberation, we need to take a quick break. Shout out to our sponsors. First up, Elite Sports, leaders in premium fightwear for BJJ and MMA. Whether you're rolling or striking, they've got gear built to move with you. Check them out at elitesports.com.
And if you're a school owner looking to optimize your dojo's performance, you need to check out Lotus by Open Black Belt. It's the ultimate management software for tracking ranks, attendance, and billing. They are currently offering a free trial to our listeners. Streamline your business so you can spend more time on the mats. Visit openblackbelt.com to start your trial today. You can find links for both in the show notes.
And if you've got a story, news tip, or question, send it to us at budocast.com.
All right, let's get back into it.
Okay, so Cyborg found her physical liberation by changing sports entirely to outrun the clock. But over in Seattle at the Climate Pledge Arena, we saw what happens when a fighter finds that same physical liberation just by finally getting healthy and violently refusing to let her legacy slip away in the middle of her prime.
We are talking about the co-main event at UFC Fight Night. And violently is genuinely the only appropriate word for what transpired in that cage.
We really need to talk about what happened to Maycee Barber because the word unnerving, which is exactly how the New York Post described it, doesn't even begin to cover it.
No, it was hard to watch.
Let's set the stage for you listening. We're looking at a flyweight matchup that's the 125-pound division between the former champion, Alexa Grasso, who is 32 years old, and a surging, highly touted top 5 contender, Maycee Barber, who was just 27.
Barber was supposed to be the new wave.
She really was. But in the opening round, Grasso lands this absolutely vicious left hand. I mean, you could see the impact whip Barber's head around. It visibly unplugs Barber from the matrix. Instantly, Barber's legs just turn to jelly, and she starts collapsing forward.
And what Grasso does next is what separates good fighters from absolute killers.
Yes. Grasso doesn't just admire her work or wait for Barber to fall. She immediately pounces on Barber's back as Barber is collapsing toward the canvas, wraps her arms around Barber's neck, and sinks in a rear naked choke.
It was so fast.
For those unfamiliar with the terminology, a rear naked choke is a blood choke applied from behind, compressing the carotid arteries on both sides of the neck.
The transition from the punch landing to the choke being fully locked in was completely seamless. It was a terrifying display of muscle memory.
But the aftermath of this sequence is what is literally burned into everyone's memory right now. The referee, Mike Beltran, recognizes the danger instantly and jumps in to physically pry Grasso off to stop the fight.
He had to use force.
He did. But Barber is completely disoriented from the sequence. As Beltran separates them, Barber grasps for the referee's leg, like desperately trying to wrestle him before her body just completely gives out.
Yeah.
She lays flat on her back, motionless, unconscious, with her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the arena ceiling for several minutes while the medical staff rushes in. The broadcast went dead silent. The arena went dead silent.
It is one of those moments that violently rips away the sporting aspect of mixed martial arts. We get so caught up in the rankings, the points, the fantasy matchups, and the walkout music, that we forget the raw physical danger involved.
Yeah.
That was a very stark reminder of the consequences of the sport.
I kept rewatching the finish from different camera angles, and honestly, getting knocked out on the feet and then instantly choked out before your knees even hit the ground, it's like a predator using a belt and suspenders approach to hunting.
That's entirely accurate.
She ensured there was absolute zero chance of recovery. It wasn't enough to hurt Barber. Grasso had to extinguish the threat entirely. But this raises a massive looming question for me regarding Barber's future.
What's that?
Going into this fight, Barber was on a massive 7-fight win streak dating all the way back to 2021. She had all the momentum in the world. Now she goes to the hospital, she gets checked out, she passes the immediate medical protocols, and she seems physically okay. Yeah, she even reposted her boyfriend's Instagram story from the hospital with a caption saying, "Part of the game, we got caught." It's a very flippant, tough guy response. But as an expert, looking at a physical shutdown that severe where your brain is glitching out so badly you try to wrestle the referee, how does a 27-year-old prospect mentally and neurologically bounce back from that kind of trauma to keep her championship hopes alive?
It's the most difficult hurdle in combat sports, bar none. Neurologically speaking, what we witnessed wasn't just a knockout, it was a compound trauma.
The compound trauma.
Yes. The brain was subjected to 2 extreme events simultaneously. First, you have the concussive blow from the left hand. That causes the brain to violently rattle inside the skull, which disrupts electrical signaling and essentially shuts off the lights.
Mm-hmm.
The body loses its motor control. That's why her legs turn to jelly.
Right.
But before the brain can even begin to reboot and send restorative signals, Grasso locks in the rear naked choke. This introduces hypoxia, which is the severe restriction of blood and oxygen to the brain.
So her brain is trying to recover from a car crash, and suddenly someone cuts the power lines to the hospital.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The brain is dealing with 2 critical emergencies at the exact same time. Now, physically, modern sports medicine is incredible. She will pass the standard concussion protocols. The immediate swelling in the brain will go down, the headaches will eventually fade, and she will be cleared to train again.
Right. Physically, she heals.
But psychologically, that is an entirely different invisible battleground.
Because in 6 months, she has to willingly step back into the exact same environment where her body fundamentally failed her. I mean, if I touch a hot stove and burn my hands severely, every instinct in my body screams at me to never touch a stove again. She has to go back to the stove.
Exactly. A professional fighter relies on a profound, almost delusional sense of self-belief. It is the literal armor they wear into the cage. You have to believe in your core that your chin can take a clean shot, and that your reactions are fast enough to defend the worst-case scenario.
You have to feel invincible.
Right. And when that illusion of invulnerability is shattered so completely and so quickly, I mean, this was in the very first round, it leaves a ghost in the machine. For a 27-year-old like Barber, who had spent 3 years riding this incredible wave of invincibility on a 7-fight win streak, her next training camp is going to be incredibly telling.
What does that actually look like in practice? Does she flinch when a sparring partner throws a left hand?
Yes, exactly that. Does she hesitate to engage in the pocket? Does her breathing get shallow when someone takes her back in grappling practice? The fighters who successfully bounce back from that kind of profound trauma have to completely deconstruct and reconstruct their psychological armor.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. They have to accept that the worst thing happened and they survived it. Some fighters do that successfully. Others, quite frankly, are never the same fighter again. They become gun-shy.
And on the complete opposite side of that trauma is Alexa Grasso, who looked like an entirely different species of animal in Seattle. I really want to highlight a quote Grasso gave in her post-fight interview.
Oh, the jiu-jitsu quote.
Yes. She was asked about the finish, and she said, "Of course my striking is always the first weapon, but I was training hard to get a finish by submission because I trained jiu-jitsu a lot." Now, to me, hearing a fighter known primarily for her crisp boxing say that she was actively hunting for a jiu-jitsu submission, that signals a terrifying evolution.
It is the textbook definition of how a former world champion levels up their game. What's fascinating here is analyzing the decision-making process in those split seconds.
Break that down for us.
Well, we often see strikers fall deeply in love with their own knockout power. If Grasso had just relied on that left hand, her instinct would have been to back off, watch Barber fall to the canvas, and then dive on top of her to try and finish the fight with ground and pound.
Right, which means striking an opponent who is on the ground. We see that all the time. But what is the danger in doing that?
The danger is that ground and pound give the hurt opponent a fraction of a second to recover. When you dive into their guard, they can instinctively wrap their arms around you, tie up your posture, stall the action, and survive the round. They can weather the storm.
So they buy time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Grasso completely short-circuited that possibility. Her immediate muscle memory wasn't to throw another punch. It was to bypass the striking realm entirely and transition straight to the most dominant grappling position in the sport, taking the back.
It was so fluid.
That shows a fighter whose brain is processing the geometry of the fight in multiple dimensions simultaneously. She isn't just playing checkers, moving piece by piece. She is playing chess. It's a massive evolution in her offensive grappling, and every single contender in the flyweight division should be very, very worried about that.
We also really need to look at the historical context of Grasso's return to understand why she came out with such venom. Because this fight wasn't just another night at the office for her.
No, not at all.
This was her first victory since her epic landscape-shifting upset over Valentina Shevchenko back in 2023. At that time, Shevchenko was considered virtually unbeatable, an absolute titan of the sport. Grasso choked her out to become the first Mexican-born female UFC champion in history. It was a massive cultural and sporting high.
A historic moment.
But since that pinnacle, it has been a deeply frustrating road for Grasso.
The pressure of being a champion, especially a pioneer for an entire nation, is immense. It wears on you.
It really does. She had an incredibly controversial split draw in the rematch with Shevchenko. Then she definitively lost the championship back to Shevchenko in their trilogy bout. And then, just to add insult to injury, she recently dropped a unanimous decision to the current #1 contender, Natalia Silva.
Real slide.
Yeah, so Grasso was sliding rapidly down the mountain. The narrative was shifting from Grasso is the new era to Grasso is a flash in the pan. She had to make a statement in Seattle to prove she still belonged in the title picture. And she dropped another fascinating, revealing quote during fight week. Alexa without injuries is different.
And that seemingly simple quote pulls back the heavy curtain on the grim reality of being an elite mixed martial artist. As fans, we tune in on Saturday night, we see the bright lights, we see the fighters in peak physical condition for 15 or 25 minutes inside the octagon, and we assume that is their baseline.
We think they're superhumans.
We do. What the fans don't see are the 8 to 10 weeks of grueling, body-breaking preparation known as a fight camp. The dirty secret of combat sports is that almost no fighter ever steps into the cage at 100% health.
What kind of injuries are we talking about here? Because they obviously passed the pre-fight medical exams to get cleared by the commission.
They pass the exams that check for catastrophic issues like brain bleeds or broken orbital bones, but they're constantly managing a litany of chronic, debilitating issues.
Like what?
Compromised joints, torn ligaments in the knees or elbows, microfractures in their feet from kicking heavy bags, severe lower back pain from wrestling. But when you are the world champion, or when you are fighting for a lucrative #1 contender spot, you push through the agony.
You just deal with it.
You have to. The financial stakes, the television contracts, and the legacy implications are simply too high to pull out of a fight for a sprained knee. You take ibuprofen, you tape it up, and you go to work compromised.
So what she's implying is that the version of her that fought Shevchenko the third time, or the version that lost to Natalia Silva, was a fundamentally compromised machine operating at a severe deficit.
Exactly. Her body wouldn't let her do what her brain was telling it to do. When a fighter finally gets a rare, magical training camp where they aren't spending half their time in the physical therapist's office just trying to walk normally, it is an absolute revelation.
They feel like a new person.
Completely. An injury-free Alexa Grasso doesn't just have better physical outputs, more speed, more power. She has total, unclouded mental clarity. She doesn't have to hesitate for a microsecond before throwing a kick because her knee might give out. She trusts her body again.
And that trust translates to speed.
Right. And that absolute physical freedom is what allowed her to react so instinctively, without a hint of hesitation, on that finishing sequence against Barber.
And, before we move on, I think it is crucial to highlight the moment that occurred immediately after that finish. We spend so much time analyzing the violence and the trauma, but combat sports has this incredibly unique, paradoxical culture of deep respect.
It really does.
As unnerving as the scene was with Barber laying on the canvas, the absolute second Grasso realized Barber was severely compromised, she completely muted her celebration.
She flipped a switch.
She didn't jump on the top of the cage. She didn't scream at the crowd. She just paused, walked over quietly, and waited silently by Barber's side while the medics worked frantically until Barber was eventually helped to her feet.
It is genuinely one of the most beautiful contradictions in all of professional sports. You spend months in a gym, obsessively figuring out how to systematically dismantle and break another human being. But the absolute second the referee steps in and signals that the contest is over, the empathy instantly returns.
It's powerful to watch.
Grasso has been on the receiving end of tough, heartbreaking losses. She intimately understands the extreme vulnerability of that moment on the canvas. By standing there quietly, she wasn't just showing basic human respect to Maycee Barber, she was actively respecting the inherent, life-altering danger of the sport that they both dedicate their lives to.
It's a profound mutual understanding that only the people who make that walk can truly comprehend. Now, Grasso proved in Seattle that a former champion can reinvent herself, get healthy, and absolutely crush the rising tide of young contenders.
She certainly did.
But the main event in Seattle proved the exact opposite narrative. Because sometimes the rising tide doesn't just challenge the established legend, it drags them into the deep water and drowns them entirely.
Oh, the main event was a very stark, very cold reminder of how quickly the guard changes in mixed martial arts. The conveyor belt never, ever stops.
Let's lay out the narrative for this middleweight collision. We are talking about the 185-pound division. We have the surging blue-collar contender, Joe Pyfer, who improved his record to 16-3 overall and an impressive 7-1 in the UFC, taking on the former long-reigning middleweight champion of the world, Israel Adesanya.
A massive step up for Pyfer.
Huge. Now, Adesanya isn't just a former champion, he is a generational icon. But Joe Pyfer defeated him via a second-round TKO, and he didn't do it by getting into a flashy technical kickboxing match. Pyfer used raw, suffocating, superior grappling to ground Adesanya and just batter him with strikes from the top position.
It was grueling.
It was Pyfer's fourth straight win in the octagon, and without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest, most profile-raising victory of his career.
To truly understand the magnitude of what Joe Pyfer accomplished, you have to understand the aura of Israel Adesanya. For years, Adesanya was considered an unsolvable puzzle in the middleweight division.
An absolute sniper.
Exactly. He used his long reach, his complex feints, and this flawless balletic footwork to pick apart the best fighters in the world from the outside. If you rushed him, he would lean back and knock you out with a counterhook. If you stood on the outside, he would chop your legs down with kicks.
He controlled the space perfectly.
Always. But Pyfer didn't try to solve the puzzle. He didn't play the game.
Yeah.
He just flipped the chessboard over.
That is exactly what it felt like watching the broadcast. Watching Pyfer grab a hold of Adesanya and violently drag him to the mat felt like watching a brilliant, meticulous chess master being forced to play a game of rugby in the mud.
Yes.
Pyfer entirely bypassed Adesanya's preferred striking distance. He refused to engage in that subtle, dangerous feinting game on the feet. He just marched forward, closed the distance, got his hands on the former champion, and dragged him into the deep, suffocating water of grappling, where Adesanya's legendary striking weapons were completely useless.
It was a perfect game plan.
But here's a part of the story that absolutely baffles me. This is where I need you to translate the business side of the sport.
All right, lay it on me.
Pyfer just TKO'd one of the greatest middleweights of all time. He achieves the defining victory of his life. Joe Rogan walks into the octagon, hands Pyfer the microphone on global television, with millions of people watching him stand over the metaphorical body of a legend. And Pyfer makes no call-out.
Crickets.
He says absolutely nothing about who he wants to fight next. He essentially says, "I'm just happy to be here." In a sport that is, quite literally, 50% physical combat and 50% marketing and self-promotion, isn't failing to call your shot after a monumental win, basically professional malpractice.
It is incredibly frustrating for the UFC matchmakers. It's frustrating for the fans who want a storyline to follow. And frankly, it is highly detrimental to the fighter's own career trajectory. In the industry, we call this the business of silence.
The business of silence.
Yeah. Let's pull back the curtain on the reality of the UFC promotional machine. That post-fight interview inside the octagon with the microphone in your face is the single most valuable 60 seconds of real estate in sports marketing.
It's prime time.
You have millions of eyeballs on you, the crowd's adrenaline is peaking, the social media algorithms are prioritizing your name, and the promotion is practically begging you to give them a compelling narrative to sell for your next fight.
Exactly. It's the ultimate lesson in workplace leverage. If you just pulled off a massive project at work that saved the company millions, and your boss asks what you want, you don't say whatever you think is fair, you demand the promotion.
Right.
Why wouldn't Pyfer grab the mic and scream, "I want the champion," or single out a specific, highly ranked contender to start a rivalry?
Because fighting is exhausting, and many fighters haven't been trained in the corporate politics of the fight game. When fighters freeze on the mic, or when they fall back on the cliche, "I'll fight whoever the UFC gives me," they are completely abandoning their leverage.
They're handing over control.
By not naming a specific name, Joe Pyfer left his fate entirely in the hands of the UFC matchmaker for the middleweight division, a man named Mick Maynard. Now, Mick Maynard is brilliant at his job, but his job isn't to build the easiest, fastest path to the world championship for Joe Pyfer.
What is his job then?
His job is to build the most profitable, entertaining cards for the UFC as a whole.
So, by not giving Maynard a storyline, Pyfer becomes just another piece of inventory.
Precisely. If Pyfer had grabbed the mic and screamed a specific top 5 fighter's name, insulted them, created some heat, the fans would immediately clip it on Twitter, the MMA media would write 100 articles about it by Monday morning, and the UFC executives would look at the engagement metrics and feel immense pressure to book that specific highly lucrative fight.
They follow the heat.
Right. But by staying silent, Pyfer essentially told the UFC, "Just put my name back in the general queue and call me when you need me."
So what you're saying is he won the physical fist fight brilliantly, but he entirely lost the promotional fight.
He completely fumbled the promotional bag. And the source material we are looking at from MMA Junkie makes a great point. This lack of a targeted call-out makes it very hard to gauge where Pyfer actually feels he fits in the current hierarchy of the division.
That makes sense.
Because, as impressive as the victory was, we also have to contextualize the win itself through the cold, calculating eyes of a matchmaker.
Yeah.
Yes, Pyfer battered an icon. But, as the analysis correctly points out, this was a late-career skidding version of Israel Adesanya.
Skidding being the operative word.
Adesanya's record is now 24-6 overall and 13-6 in the UFC. He has lost multiple fights recently. He is not the invincible, untouchable champion he was 5 years ago.
So in the brutal mathematics of UFC matchmaking, there's a discount applied to the value of this win.
Absolutely. Beating a fading legend elevates your name value tremendously with the casual fan base. It gets your face on the promotional poster for your next fight. But it doesn't automatically grant you a title shot against a prime, destructive killer who's currently holding the belt.
It's a stepping stone, not a golden ticket.
Beating an older Adesanya proves to the UFC that you firmly belong in the elite tier of the division, but you still have to beat someone who is currently in their terrifying physical prime to actually earn a shot at the gold.
Okay, so let's map out this middleweight future, because the division is an absolute logjam right now. The sources lay out the landscape perfectly.
It's a Shark Tank.
It really is. The current middleweight champion is the terrifying grappler Khamzat Chimaev, and he is scheduled to defend his title against former champion Sean Strickland at UFC 328, which is coming up on May 9th. Pyfer, even with this massive highlight reel win over Adesanya, is not ready to be thrown in against the winner of Chimaev versus Strickland.
No, the jump in current prime competitive danger is just too high. The UFC isn't going to catapult Pyfer past the rest of the established top 5 just yet. They need to see him pass one more specific test.
What kind of test?
He needs what we call a title eliminator, a fight where the winner is guaranteed the next shot at the belt.
And the article points to a very specific, fascinating name for that potential title eliminator. Caio Borralho. Now, Borralho is 18-2 in MMA, and he is coming off a massive grinding decision win over Rainier de Ridder at UFC 326 earlier this month.
A great fight.
So why is Caio Borralho the absolute perfect puzzle piece for Pyfer's next step? What does that fight prove?
If we look at the specific stylistic matchup, booking Pyfer against Borralho is brilliant, sinister matchmaking. Borralho isn't a fading, older striker like Adesanya. Borralho is a grappling powerhouse operating in his absolute, undeniable physical prime.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Pyfer just proved to the world that he can use his wrestling and grappling to completely dominate a legendary striker. It does. If Pyfer can beat Borralho, it definitively proves to Mick Maynard and the UFC brass that his grappling isn't just a gimmick used to beat up strikers. It definitively proves his grappling is good enough to dominate the best grappling specialists in the division.
That is what makes it a true title eliminator.
It answers the final, lingering question the matchmakers have about Joe Pyfer's championship viability.
It's the ultimate stress test for his specific skill set. But the sources don't stop at Borralho. They throw out a few other fascinating, chaotic options for Pyfer's next step. They mention former champion Dricus Du Plessis, the incredibly aggressive Gregory Rodriguez, or the highly technical contender Nassourdine Imavov.
All very dangerous men.
I want to break down how each of these very different men would test a completely different facet of Pyfer's evolving game, starting with Dricus Du Plessis.
Fighting Dricus Du Plessis is like fighting a chaotic avalanche. He is chaos personified in the octagon. He is incredibly awkward. His striking technique looks sloppy to the trained eye, but he is incredibly powerful, and he simply never, ever stops moving forward.
So he just overwhelms you.
Yes. If Pyfer fights Du Plessis, the test isn't about technical, nuanced grappling like the Borralho fight. The test is about cardiovascular conditioning and surviving a sheer, brutal physical brawl. Du Plessis would force Pyfer to fight at a frantic, exhausting pace for 25 minutes. He would drag Pyfer into deep, muddy water and see if Pyfer drowns.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare. And what about Gregory Rodriguez, a man literally nicknamed RoboCop?
Rodriguez is terrifying for entirely different reasons. He is perhaps the hardest pound-for-pound single-shot hitter in the middleweight division right now. He has ungodly knockout power.
But there's a catch.
There is. The catch is he is also a high-level black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Against Rodriguez, Pyfer would be playing with fire on the feet because of the knockout threat. And unlike the Adesanya fight, Pyfer couldn't just blindly shoot for a panic takedown if he gets hit hard. Because taking Rodriguez to the mat puts you right into his elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guard. Rodriguez can submit you off his back in a heartbeat. That fight tests Pyfer's fight IQ. Can he strike safely without getting knocked out? And can he grapple without getting caught in a submission?
And finally, Nassourdine Imavov.
Imavov is the cold, calculating technician of the group. He is surgical, precise, and fights very well moving backward as a counter-striker. He would severely test Pyfer's patience.
Because Pyfer likes to push the pace.
Pyfer likes to aggressively close the distance. Imavov is a master at managing distance. The test there is, can Pyfer systematically close the gap without recklessly walking into a perfectly timed counterstrike that knocks him out cold?
It's a totally different puzzle.
Each of these four men, Borralho, Du Plessis, Rodriguez, and Imavov, ask a completely different, highly specific biomechanical and strategic question of Joe Pyfer. And because Pyfer didn't use his post-fight interview to pick his preferred test, he is now sitting by the phone waiting for McMaynard to decide which of these brutal exams he has to take next.
It really puts into perspective how difficult the path to a UFC championship is. You don't just have to beat one style, you have to prove you can solve every single puzzle in the division.
It's a gauntlet.
So what does this all mean when we take a massive step back and look at the entire weekend across both boxing and MMA? We started this deep dive with a mission to examine the life cycle of a fighter, and looking at these three specific stories side by side really paints a comprehensive, fascinating picture.
It really does.
Combat sports is essentially an unrelenting conveyor belt of eras. It never, ever stops moving forward.
The conveyor belt analogy is perfect.
On one far end of the belt, you have the 40-year-old Cris Cyborg. She knows the clock is ticking loudly on her mixed martial arts career. She can feel the end approaching. So she is intelligently stepping off that specific MMA conveyor belt and finding a completely new ring to conquer in boxing before her athletic time runs out entirely.
She's dictating her own terms.
Exactly. She is dictating the terms of her own exit strategy and securing her financial legacy. In the middle of the belt, you have the 32-year-old Alexa Grasso. She reached the peak, faced extreme adversity, lost her belt, and dealt with debilitating injuries.
But she bounced back.
She got healthy, and she violently asserted that she is still in her absolute prime, capable of evolving her grappling game to crush the younger generation coming up behind her. And then, at the start of the championship tier of the belt, you have the rising Joe Pyfer.
The new blood.
He represents the new wave, using raw, suffocating physicality and wrestling to abruptly close the book on Israel Adesanya's legendary run, signaling the definitive arrival of a new era at middleweight.
It's the brutal, beautiful circle of combat life playing out over 48 hours across two continents. But looking deeply at these specific trajectories, especially the mechanical way Pyfer dismantled Adesanya on the mat and the way Cyborg successfully transitioned to boxing, it leaves me with a final lingering thought for you to ponder.
Let's hear it. Lay it on us.
Look closely at the exact biomechanics of the fights we just discussed. A younger, incredibly explosive grappler like Joe Pyfer just battered a legendary, aging striker like Israel Adesanya on the ground.
It was tough to watch.
It was brutal. And it exposed the inherent vulnerability of an older body trying to deal with the heavy, exhausting top pressure of a prime wrestler. Once an older fighter is on their back, they simply don't have the explosive, fast-twitch muscle fibers required to stand back up.
The tank empties so fast.
Meanwhile, an older striker like Cris Cyborg has successfully and very profitably migrated to the pure striking realm of boxing. In boxing, she doesn't have to worry about the devastating physical impact of being taken down. She doesn't have to carry another human being's weight.
Right.
It makes you wonder, as the current generation of elite MMA strikers, guys like Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, or even Israel Adesanya himself, hit their late 30s and early 40s, are we going to see a mass exodus of these legends?
Wow, that's an interesting thought.
Will they entirely abandon the grappling-heavy, physically destructive octagon for the boxing ring? Will professional boxing simply become the lucrative, physically safer retirement home for MMA's greatest strikers, allowing them to cash massive checks while protecting their aging bodies from the devastating ground and pound of the new, younger wrestling generation?
That is a phenomenal question. It completely reframes how we might look at the future of these crossover novelty fights. We always assume they do it just for the massive boxing paychecks.
The money ups.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
But when you break down the biomechanics, it might not just be about the money. It might be a fundamental act of athletic self-preservation. It's about surviving the decline. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the weekend's violence and the mechanics behind it. Keep questioning the storylines behind the scorecards. Keep looking for the why and the how behind the what, and we will catch you on the next exploration. That's it for this episode of BetoCast. Thanks for joining us as we break down the latest in martial arts. We'll be back soon with more news, stories, and insights. Until then, train hard, stay humble.